We have more people coming in. All right, so I think we'll just get started. Well, thank you for joining. It's very nice to see you. Hi, Denise. Very nice to see your face. That means you made it into our classroom. As mentioned in the outreach, I'm currently an executive educator and leadership coach. However, I do have some background in law in my earlier career. I was formerly licensed to practice law in China. And the first chapter, my first chapter of my US life was on the East Coast in New York and Washington, DC. And so in DC, I worked with a large international law firm on an anti-dumping case, helping with a Chinese industry, pencil industry as their client. And that was so I worked with them as a visiting attorney. And that was my first taste of American work culture. Working overtime was a frequent occurrence. At first I thought, oh, this is great. They expense my dinners and sent me home on taxi. But then I realized, oh, I have not seen daylight for a whole week. Well, subsequently, my life took a different direction as I went to moved to California and got my MBA from Stanford University. And subsequently, I worked in the corporate world and then started my own business for the next 20-some years. However, I'm still connected to the legal community as a certified Mandarin interpreter, which I do on the side. So I've sat in depositions and mediations with attorneys in a lot of the depositions and mediations. And we also have attorney participants in our executive education program at Stanford, where I teach. I remember one assignment that we have in the decision-making class is to address the hidden cost of stressed out workers. And one woman attorney wrote about her workplace with the example of a coworker who would send out the group text about 9 p.m. asking, hey, is anyone in the office still want to order pizza? She really resented this behavior because she knew that he's trying to send a signal that he's still working that late. And this is the behavior that the firm encouraged and rewarded. So in some ways, I guess the culture in this aspect is still the same. This was, of course, just before COVID. So maybe they can't do group pizzas anymore, large gathering in the office. So maybe he has to send a different type of signal. But it shows the existence of the culture. So from what I observe as mostly an outsider now is not an uncommon stories of legal talent going from young, ambitious, and high achievers to burnout, depression, and substance abuse. Here are some statistics which you're probably familiar by now, so I won't go into them. The first time that I was asked to adapt my emotional and social intelligence class to the legal profession for a Competence Issues program, as part of my research, I read this heartbreaking open letter by the widow of a partner at a big law in Los Angeles who committed suicide. Such tragedy that could have been prevented. So there are lots of causes to the mental health issues in the legal profession. External circumstances, as you know, include long working hours and constant stress, isolation, the adversarial nature of the work, difficult clients, high-stake cases, exposure to dire life situations, and pressure for income to pay off student debts. It's a lot of money to go to law school. In fact, a big part of the reason that I didn't go to law school and went to business school instead was it would be 1 year shorter and several tens of thousands of dollars less than I had to come up with. Unpredictable schedules that you may be subject to, and a very competitive work environment. Personality-wise, a lot of attorneys are perfectionists with unrealistic standards of achievement and hyper self-criticism that are maladaptive. There's a superhero expectation with no room for error or humanness. The law school training has a side effect of pessimistic thinking. You're trained to always think of the worst case scenario. And we mentioned the need for billable hours, and in some cases, the want for prestige in a culture that socially sanctions, promotes and rewards overwork, and that emphasis on outward success and the progressive nature of mental illness makes it possible to conceal and manipulate reality for years. For a long time, and it may still be the case, not only in the legal profession, but also and beyond, there's a stigma around mental health. So it's shameful to ask for help and shameful to be vulnerable. So that is why Arianna Huffington said a few years ago, if you were to design a perfect machine for stress and burnout, that would be very much like the legal profession. And there's no release valve in this machine. There's inadequate coping mechanism against these factors. Of course, the legal profession is not the only such machine, and I don't mean to pick on lawyers. Burnout is prevalent in many sectors. The tech industry, for one, is notorious for stress and overwork. Often my coaching clients bring this challenge. Some medical workers too, overworking while caring for patients. There are promising signs that a movement is underway to improve health and well-being of the legal profession. The ABA and many state bars have well-being initiatives. And as you know, we have this mandatory class on mental health and related issues. When I ran my course in January, a firm wrote to me that their New Year's resolution was to improve work-life balance for all of their employees. However, culture shifts take time, and recognition of problems may be uneven. You on the front line may know better whether the shift is more of is becoming a norm or more of an exception. To the extent issues still exist significantly, today we'll discuss mental health disorders affecting lawyer competence, their major types, signs and symptoms, their early detection and prevention. We'll then dive into various types of addictions, which are closely related to and often co-occur with mental disorders. We'll look into the underlying neurochemical processes for a deeper understanding of addiction, the why and the how. Towards the end, I'll point to preliminary tests one can take and some other resources for help. Here are some major mental disorders that manifest in the legal profession, which could lead to work performance decrease and burnout, impaired problem solving and decision making, poor judgment and ethical irresponsibility, and therefore intervention by colleagues, and even worse, discipline by the bar. Now, we often toss around some of these terms casually, like people would say, oh, I'm really depressed. I myself often say, I'm an OCD, or I have ADHD. What we are discussing here in this context, though, is clinical level disorders. On the other hand, I must emphasize that I'm not a psychiatrist. The information presented here is sourced from experts in the field, but accurate diagnoses should be done by qualified healthcare professionals. Depression. Depression is marked by recurrent severe periods of clear-cut changes in mood, thought processes, and motivation, lasting for a minimum of 2 weeks. 1 out of 5 Americans will experience a major depressive episode at least once during his or her lifetime. The rate for lawyers is 3 to 4 times that. Changes in mood and emotions include there tends to be lots of grief, lots of sadness. Certainly there's no surprise there. Threshold to cry is often a signature of depression if there is a change in the pattern. Changes in thought processes typically include negative thoughts and hopelessness, sometimes guilt. There's anhedonia, which is the general lack of enjoyment of things we typically enjoy, such as food, sex, exercise, and social gatherings. Depression also affects sleep, energy, appetite, or weight. So one of the most common symptoms is early waking and not being able to fall back to sleep despite being exhausted. I admit, back in my 40s, I had several years of, I never, sought diagnose, I never sought to be diagnosed, but learning more about it as I got older later on, I probably had depression for some life circumstances. And one of the things was just what I just mentioned, waking in the middle of the night and not being able to fall back to sleep. Manifestations among lawyers may be procrastination as it becomes more difficult to be productive. During the depressed period, paperwork gets piled up, deadlines pass, and emails go unanswered, leaving assignments incomplete because they cannot concentrate on them. Too depressed to get out of bed because of the mood, low energy, or lack of sleep, unable to communicate with clients, attend meetings, appear in court, or work on client matters. These symptoms I just described more precisely should be called major depression or unipolar depression, as opposed to bipolar depression, which is a subtype of the broader definition of depression. The word bipolar means 2 extremes. For the many millions experiencing bipolar disorder around the world, life is split between 2 extreme or 2 different realities, elation and depression. Extreme highs alongside the lows. Extreme highs are known as the manic episodes, during which time a person can range from feeling irritable to invincible. But those euphoric episodes go beyond ordinary feelings of joy, causing troubling symptoms like racing thoughts, sleeplessness, rapid speech, impulsive actions, and risky behaviors. For those oscillating between these emotional states, it can feel impossible to find the balance necessary to lead a healthy life. Signs among lawyers might be happy and fine one day, full of enthusiasm. That's their high energy manic episodes. They can take on heavy workloads, but unable to get out of bed another day, not showing up to work due to feeling depressed when they enter the periods of depression. Obsessive compulsive disorder is a type of anxiety disorder where individuals experience thoughts or mental images that are unwanted or disturbing. These persistent intrusive thoughts or obsessions can cause a lot of anxiety and distress. In response to these thoughts, we may feel driven to perform repetitive acts called compulsion to relieve that distress. OCD is due at least in part to serotonin deficits in the orbitofrontal cortex, OFC, of the brain, and is often the combination of genetic predisposition or vulnerability brought out by environmental stresses. Compulsive behaviors may include counting items in our immediate environment, attempting to undo a thought, visiting healthcare providers repeatedly, keeping items we no longer need for fear that we may need them in the future. Signs among lawyers might be over-researching a case, analyzing facts, double-checking legal citations beyond necessary, writing in the verbose manner, arguing irrelevant legal positions, not being able to view the applicable law correctly. So basically, a lot of trees missing the forest. Now, because the orbitofrontal cortex, the OFC, is a critical part of the brain involved in decision-making, deficiency in this area causing OCD often leads to trouble making decisions as well. OCD is but one type of what's broadly known as anxiety disorder, characterized by excessive anxiety that can become difficult to control and negatively affect an individual's day-to-day living. Now, the key word here is excessive. We all experience varying degrees of anxiety in our demanding lives, and anxiety level of the population overall probably has been elevated in the recent few years due to the pandemic and other nasty events, both in the country and around the world. Biologically speaking, we have a system for stress genetically encoded in us as part of our survival mechanism. There are actually positive things about acute or short-term stress. It keeps us out of danger. It activates our immune response. It sharpens our focus. And this could extend to medium stress as well for a few weeks or a couple months when you're really, working on a case intensely. If we can learn to navigate it or raise our stress capacity, that would be fine. However, long-term stress is definitely bad for all the reasons you are probably familiar with: the increased risk of high blood pressure, heart disease, higher incidence of schizophrenia for those predisposed to it, impairment of cognitive functions, so on and so forth. Anxiety can persist longer than 6 months and can get even worse if not treated. Lawyers suffer from generalized anxiety disorder at rates higher than the general population for a variety of risk factors. We've mentioned some of these before: heavy responsibility, billable hours, public speaking, court appearances, negotiation with on different difficult cases, with interaction with contentious opposing counsel, and lots of tight deadlines. One other disorder to highlight is the attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. This is a developmental disorder and chronic pattern defined by inattention, which is having trouble staying on task or listening, disorganization, losing, misplacing materials all the time, hyperactivity, impulsivity, fidgeting, difficulty in staying seated or waiting, and general inability to focus. Now, this used to be better known among children, but it is apparently manifesting more among adults as well, thanks at least in part to electronic devices and social media, which we'll talk more about later. So signs among lawyers might be struggling to get organized, falling behind on writing reports, having a difficult time staying focused on boring tasks or managing their time, losing interest and desire to finish an assignment, may develop a reputation for being chronically late, having, performing excellently sometimes, but then really poorly at other times. So those are some of the major disorders. Sometimes symptoms of mental health appear as physical problems, such as stomach pain, back pain, headaches, or otherwise other unexplained aches and pains as well. After all, the mind and the body are connected. So it's important to take note of warning signs, both physically and mentally, if you see them in yourself or someone else. Learning about the early signs of mental health issues and early prevention can potentially decrease the severity of mental illness. And in some cases, it might be possible to delay or prevent a major mental illness altogether. Besides paying attention to warning signs, it would certainly help detection and prevention to get routine medical care and engage in self-care as well, which means sufficient sleep, healthy eating, and regular physical activity. You know, we all know their benefits. I like to, so, you know, we also should be getting our annual checkups. I like to schedule them around December or January. And I just did mine for January. If you haven't had yours for the past year, I urge you to get your annual physical. There's a strong connection between mental illness and addiction, which probably doesn't surprise you. People diagnosed with mood and anxiety disorders are approximately twice as likely as the general population to suffer from substance abuse. Lawyers experience substance dependence at higher rates than the general population, just like they do significant mental health issues. In the next half an hour or so of our session today, we'll take a closer look at addictions. The fifth and latest edition of Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is a publication by the American Psychiatric Association, considered one of the Bibles of psychiatry in the United States, recognizes substance-related disorders ranging from the use of 10 separate classes of drugs: alcohol, caffeine, cannabis, hallucinogens, inhalants, opioids, sedatives, hypnotics, stimulants, and tobacco. But addictions are not limited to substance or chemicals. There are also behavioral addictions, or sometimes referred to as process addictions, in activities such as eating, sex, gaming and gambling, shopping, and even work. Regardless of the type, addictions have some common characteristics. The excitement or high from use of the substance or behavior, craving of the high, developing a tolerance, which means increased use or repeated behavior over time, engaging in this behavior or substance, psychological and physical withdrawal when such substance or behavior are taken away from them, and loss of control. These could result in a host of adverse effects and consequences, such as accidents, destructive behavior, a suite of problems: financial, health, legal, relationship, work problems, family conflicts, and even suicide. Addictions may have various observable signs and symptoms, such as significant weight loss or gain, unsteady gait, loss of breath mints and mouthwash, sleeping a lot more or less than usual, or at different times of the day or night, changes in behavior, either fast talking, loud laughters, or extended periods of silence, changes in energy, one moment unexpectedly and extremely tired, another time unexpectedly energetic, extreme mood changes, and increased irritation. There may be repeated unexplained disappearance, often with a sense of urgency, and other unexplained issues as well, with lots of excuses. The person may be secretive. They may even lie or steal. Now, of course, we all engage in the activities and even some of the substances identified above to varying degree, and it may be rather normal. What makes them problematic and a disorder is if they are engaged or consumed in a way that negatively affects relationships, work, or school. It becomes an addiction when there is a preoccupation with it, spending a lot of time planning, securing, securing things, engaging in the behavior, or recovering from the addictive behavior. When one has difficulty cutting down or controlling the substance or the behavior, especially when it's accompanied with withdrawal and when tolerance or dependence develops. Specific addictions fall largely into these groups in terms of potential complications. Among substances, depressants include alcohol, barbiturates, benzodiazepines, which are those that slow the activity of the central nervous system and can lead to slowed heartbeat, respiration, confusion, coma, and death, or even death. Stimulants are just kind of the opposite, leading to increased energy levels. And these include caffeine, nicotine, amphetamines, meth, and cocaine. Opioids such as painkillers, heroin, and morphine decrease sensitivity to pain and produce strong cravings for more and more of that substance. We all have heard of the opioids epidemic in America. Behavioral addictions are characterized by compulsion that persists despite negative consequences. For most of my life, I could proudly proclaim that I would not like myself addicted to anything. I'm a believer in moderation. I eat most things. I drink socially, and I even have puffed some cigarettes and cigars when I was younger, just to know how it feels like. I never had interest in trying drugs because it's just so scary. But over the past couple of years, I realized that I am not above or immune to addictions myself if we take into account behaviors. And this is partly why I wanted to learn more about addiction. And the other part is I have people close to me with whom I frequently have arguments about addictive substances. One behavioral addiction that's fast on the rise is technology, or also known as digital addiction, that has been sneaking up on people, on a large part of the population. Here we have some statistics of American cell phone use. 80% of Americans say that they check their phones within the first 10 minutes waking up. 40% use or look at their phone while driving. 47% use or look at their phone on a date. 67% have texted someone in the same room as them. 70% use their phones on the toilet. 52% said that they have never gone longer than 24 hours without their cell phone and would feel panicky when their phone battery charge goes below 20%. So these are some pretty pathetic statistics, and I'm guilty of some of them myself. And here, of course, there are also the internet activities on the internet that many people are addicted to. Online gambling, social media, cyber sex or pornography, Facebooking, Instagramming, the higher tech like virtual reality, etc. What would constitute addictive behaviors in this area? Signs and symptoms may include cravings and urges to use digital devices, inability to moderate or abstain from these mediums, neglecting important life areas such as work or school relationships, continuing to use them despite realizing that they are having some consequences, using these devices in dangerous situations such as I mentioned, driving or walking. Now, I have not been driving while using the phone or walking across the intersection, but I have certainly caught myself frequently reaching for the phone as soon as I'm stopped at a red light, whether in the car, in the vehicle, or at the intersection. Other signs and symptoms: losing interest in social and leisure activities that once you enjoyed, using devices to induce pleasure or experience gratification, so on and so forth. So these could have physical effects such as backache, headache, weight gain or losses, and insomnia, and poor sleep hygiene. Carpal tunnel syndrome, probably some of us have experienced, and lots of teenagers with their thumbing their phones have problems with their thumbs. Blurred or strained vision. For most of my life, I had perfect vision until a couple of years ago during the pandemic. My driver license was up for renewal. I went to the DMV and couldn't pass the vision test. My father has been telling me, you're using too much computer, too much devices. And I would say, oh, it's just aging. But secretly, I admit we are probably both correct. There are psychological effects as well, such as the mental health disorders that we discussed earlier, in increased stress, restlessness, irritability, agitation. Technology is a breeding ground for isolation, and could cause us to be defensive, to lose a sense of time and unable to keep schedule and feeling guilt, procrastinate, so on and so forth. So both physical and psychological effects can negatively affect work performance and productivity. Speaking of work, that can be an addiction itself. We Americans have a culture worshiping work. 1 in 10 are living with work addiction. And this is especially common among perfectionists because it gives them a high that's craved by high achievers. While at first glance, this seems to be innocuous or even a noble issue that many don't take seriously, but work addiction is actually a mental health condition that can have many negative effects, leading to poor health, certainly, impaired judgment, emotional and nervous breakdown, certainly burnout, and decreased productivities. So it could be counterproductive to your desired outcome. And work addiction often masks psychological issues such as anxiety and fear of failure, serving as a coping mechanism, but an unhealthy one at that. Now, we know that, we have talked a lot about the several kinds of addictions, and we know the common characteristics of addictions now. But why do we have highs? And why is it hard to rein in our addiction, knowing that they're bad for us, or at least many of them are bad for us? For a deeper understanding of addiction, we need to look under our cranial hood for a glimpse of its mechanism on neurological, cellular, and even molecular levels. The oldest and still one of the most fundamental functions of our brain is to influence behaviors that meet our vital needs: eating, drinking, reproducing, and by extension, parenting, and responding to aggression so that we can survive as individuals, as a species, and protect ourselves from danger. So in the course of evolution, certain areas of our brain developed a role to provide a pleasurable sensation as a reward for carrying out these vital functions. And natural selection has associated strong feelings of satisfaction with these behaviors. These brain areas are interconnected with one another to form what is known as the reward circuit. The ventral tegmental area, the VTA, which is a group of neurons at the very center of the brain, plays an essential role in this circuit. So the VTA would receive information from several other regions that tell it how well our fundamental needs are being met. The VTA then The VTA then forwards this information to another structure further forward in the brain, which is the nucleus accumbens. How does it do that? How does it send that information? With a particular chemical messenger, dopamine. The increase in the level of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens, as well as in some other brain regions as well, reinforces that behavior by which we satisfy our fundamental needs. Subsequently, this reward circuitry expanded to encourage us to repeat other pleasurable experiences that we learn in the course of our lives as well, beyond the most basic. Let's get to know dopamine a little bit more. This neurotransmitter is not that common in our brain, produced by scarcely more than, let's say, 0.3% of neurons in the brain. However, these neurons play an essential role in many of our functions and behaviors. For example, they are involved in the control of movement, the body's movement. Destruction of some of the neurons cause the trembling characteristics of Parkinson's disease. The opposite problem, if there's too much dopamine in certain regions of the brain, produces the terrible symptoms associated with schizophrenia. And lastly, another part of a kind of dopamine producing neurons, which are relevant here, discussed here, come into play in the experience of desire or pleasure. That's why dopamine has come to known as the pleasure hormone. This association between dopamine and our reward-seeking behavior is one of the most interesting discoveries of the 1990s. The more we learn about the properties of this molecule, the more it unravels the complex yet essential role that it plays in all dependencies. Be it alcohol, drugs, or apps, or sugar or sex for that matter, the response in our brain is the same. It produces the feel-good dopamine, evoking feelings of pleasure and motivation, but then the dopamine hit is quickly followed by pain or a calm down, so that we would feel motivated again. This balancing seesaw of pleasure and pain, and shall we call it dopamine justice, it made sense in the time of early humans when we had to constantly search for our basic needs, be it water or food or shelter. The pleasure doesn't last very long and quickly followed by pain, so we immediately were searching again. And it's really an ingenious method invented by nature. Nowadays, in modern life, we live in a world of abundance rather than scarcity. We have sugar, social media, TV, sex, and whatever, other dopamine triggering stimuli. They are readily available, and almost every behavior has become drugified. And so they are triggering dopamine, making it short-circuiting and overheating the circuit. Yet our brains have not evolved for this fire hydrant of dopamine. When we are barraged by these pleasure-producing stimuli, our brains, just have to do this balance, and eventually we need more and more of it just to feel normal or not in pain. And this vicious cycle not only makes us experience the symptoms of tolerance, dependency, and withdrawal, it can actually lead to depression, anxiety, irritability, and insomnia. Certainly not everyone would succumb to addiction even with the same amount of exposure. Some people are more susceptible than others, and it's not just about willpower. It might surprise you to know that genetic factors play a significant role in substance disorder, in fact, accounting for 40 to 60% of the risk. I was dating a few years ago a fairly prominent business school professor who privately told me that he has He has addictive genes, and I didn't know what he was talking about. How could that be? What does that mean? And as I got learned more about this, it makes sense because drugs mimic natural brain peptides such as endorphins in the case of opioids, or anandamide in the case of cannabis. But through dopamine, drugs would bypass the behavior stage and stimulate the reward pathways directly. And this hijacking is partially conferred by genes that make our receptors more sensitive to drugs. And some of us have genes that are more vulnerable to this. So that's genetics. Personality traits. Some personality traits put people at higher risks of addiction: sensation seeking, impulsiveness, anxiety sensitivity, and hopelessness. With the exception of sensation seeking, all of these traits are linked to mental health disorders as well. And the reverse is true also. Mental health disorders such as anxiety, depression, ADHD, or PTSD can lead to problematic substance use because the person tries to treat the symptoms of the mental condition by self-medicating. Developmental factors in the person's history or upbringing, for example, early or adolescence use, family environmental relationships, be it parental or siblings, childhood trauma, or peer relations, they all play a role in the potential of substance disorder. So do social factors such as isolation and loneliness. Interestingly, socialization and drugs work on the same pathways within the brain as within our brain, socialization and drugs, because as social animals, humans derive significant well-being from social connection. And drugs are literally an attempt to get that neurobiological feeling of social connection. So positive and healthy socialization can serve as a protective factor, whereas negative or inadequate socialization could be a risk factor. Different drugs have different characteristics and different dependency and so forth. I won't go in there, but risk factors for technology addiction are in many ways similar to those for chemical addictions. In fact, people with drug addiction problems are at higher risks for internet addiction as well, because there are similar alterations in the brain. And the links to mental health and social factors are applicable too. In fact, maybe even more pronounced in the latter case, since the use of the internet and social media allows one to communicate without having to interact face to face. One thing worth noting specifically about the internet and mobile apps are their designed addictiveness. Many tech companies have leveraged a neuroscience understanding about dopamine and the brain's reward system in their product design. They know that immediate and unpredictable rewards are even more addictive than fixed, predictable, and long-term rewards. That's why we are so hooked online by social media, dating apps, random offers and discounts that you may be getting from your online store. This is taught in business school classes and shared among tech companies. I don't know if anyone has seen a documentary called Social Dilemma. It's an expose by former tech executives at Google, Facebook, etc., that goes in depth on how this is done behind the scenes. If you haven't watched it, I highly recommend it, especially if you have children, because they're the most vulnerable. And as we know, many of these factors were heightened during the 3-year-long COVID-19 pandemic we've just lived through, with uncertainties, anxieties, and isolation exacerbating our risks for adoption, driving us to reach for the fridge, the pantry, the phone, or the liqueur cabinet. You've seen that there are many types of addictions, just like a tree has many branches. To solve the addiction problem, cutting the branches would not be enough. We have to tackle the roots and the soil. The roots being the hereditary, biological, and psychological factors, and the soil being the social, cultural, and relational environment. If we address the problem at that deeper level, there is hope for recovery and even growth and wisdom that one can gain from that journey, as difficult as it might be. So you might be wondering, well, where do I stand? Do I have digital addiction? Is my alcohol consumption at an addicted level? Do I truly have anxiety disorder? Again, accurate diagnoses should be sought from healthcare professionals. However, there are some tests one can take to have an initial assessment. The lawyer assistance program at the Bar Association, which I'm sure you are familiar with, they have lots of helpful resources. For example, self-assessment tests like this one on anxiety. I'll have you scan through, and one on depression. And one thing to note, it needs to have at least 2 weeks of a period of time with these moods. For addictions, there are various screening tests. For example, for alcohol, there are various tests such as AUDIT, or Alcohol Use Disorders Identification Test, that's developed by the World Health Organization. The Internet Addiction Test, developed by Dr. Kimberly Young, who I think unfortunately passed away. And it's a questionnaire that measures mild, moderate, and severe levels using a 0 to 5 frequency scale. The Bergen work addiction scale, which requires rating on a series of items on a frequency between never, rarely, sometimes, often, or always. And you see if you have at least 4 out of them, that's often or always. There is a slew of other psychological tests as well, which I will provide you after the class, along with other written resources about health, mental health, and addiction. Here's a snapshot of treatment options and therapeutic modalities for individuals who are properly diagnosed, including residential treatment, outpatient, day treatment, or social living communities, with modalities such as motivational enhancement therapy and ET, CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. Certainly there's medication, and exercise and recovery coaching as well. Social support is always essential to recovery. Recognition and desire to want help is a critical first step. So I mentioned the lawyer assistance program, and certainly your doctor and mental health professionals are the people to reach out to, as well as trusted friends and family for ongoing day-to-day support. It's very important. So summing up, here's what we learned today in a nutshell: mental health issues, mental health impact, their detection and prevention, substance addictions, behavioral addictions, the neurochemical process underneath, pleasure-pain balance, dopamine and reward circuitry, self-assessments, and help resources. So I've gone through this pretty fast. And I hope you find at least some of this useful. And I'm curious to see if you have any thoughts, reactions, or reflections, and of course, if you have any questions either now or later, I'll try my best to address them. And if I can't, I can refer to those who are more capable about this. And before I forget, your compliance paperwork will be sent to you. I want to say in a couple days, but it may, so the recording may take a bit longer. Now that I realize I missed the first portion of it, if you don't mind, I will maybe pull the part from the Thursday session, but then stitch together our session. But the written materials along, including this presentation and a list of the resources on the other slide, I can provide those earlier. The videos, I'm going to LA for a deposition as an interpreter on Monday through Wednesday. So there may be a delay for the recordings, but I'll try to get the other materials up sooner. And please include your evaluation, because I need to know, what you find helpful, useful, and what improvements you would suggest. I will be offering this class again, maybe even for this current cycle, but definitely for the upcoming cycle. So your feedback and suggestions would be very valuable for me. And of course, I would appreciate if you liked it to tell your colleagues and organizations about it. And I also coach individually on many aspects of work and life, professionally and personal goals. And this coming year, we may be organizing small group coaching to facilitate peer support. So if any of that may be useful for either yourself or your colleagues, younger colleagues, that I would certainly be very happy to have a conversation. So now, any reflections, questions? How would you assess this? How would you, what from the learning today touched you the most? How do you see addiction differently? What action would you take differently? And I do see a raised hand from Dwayne, right? Any other? I'm very happy to stay here and chat more. I just want to be respectful of people's time. If anyone needs to sign off, feel free to do so, but I'm happy to stay here and chat with anybody. And I want to just also, in closing, want to wish everybody, if you need to leave, a great holiday season and happy and fulfilling, healthy professional life.